There is something no one says openly about people who work for decades and end up with almost nothing. It's not laziness, it's not lack of opportunity, it's not bad luck. It's an invisible psychological pattern that begins long before the first paycheck. Most of these people worked harder than anyone around them. They woke up early. They showed up on time. They were responsible. They did everything they were told was the right thing to do. And yet, the money never stayed. Because there is a brutal difference between working to survive and thinking like someone who accumulates. And that difference is not in the spreadsheet, it's in the mind. It's in how a person has always seen money as relief, as a reward, as something that exists to be spent the moment it appears. The Stoics had an uncomfortable observation about financial discipline. Most people don't have a problem with earning. They have a problem with what they feel when they earn. Because money in hand activates something emotional that is much older than any financial habit. It activates the need to rest from scarcity, to prove you've made it somewhere, to finally feel like you deserve something good. And it is exactly at that psychological moment that wealth escapes. Silently, repeatedly, for decades. Until the person looks back and realizes the problem was never how much they earned. It was what they felt every time the money arrived. There is a story that repeats itself in almost every family. It doesn't matter the country, it doesn't matter the generation, it doesn't matter how much things have changed in the outside world. The story is always the same. A man spends 30, 40 years working. Sometimes more. He wakes up before the sun. He carries weight his body was not meant to carry for so long. He gives up vacations, weekends, moments with his children that will never come back. And when he gets near the end, he looks at what he built, and the numbers don't add up. It's not dramatic. It's not a visible tragedy. It's worse than that. It's silent. It's the quiet realization that decades of real effort did not translate into real security. And the first reaction from outsiders is always the same. But how? Working that much? As if work and wealth were the same thing. As if effort and accumulation were synonyms. As if hours traded for money automatically turned into assets. They don't. And this confusion, this deep belief that hard work guarantees financial security, is one of the most expensive psychological errors a person can carry for an entire lifetime. Because work is exchange, wealth is construction. And the difference between these two concepts is not technical, it's emotional, it's psychological. It is formed long before any conscious financial decision. Most people learn about money in the worst possible way. Not from books, not from courses, not from someone who truly understands accumulation. They learn by watching their parents. And what most observed was this. Money is something that comes and goes. It arrives at the beginning of the month. It pays the bills. It covers what is necessary. If a little is left over, maybe there's something special. But there is almost never anything left. And when there is something left, there is a silent emotional pressure to spend it. Not because the person is irresponsible, but because spending is the only language of reward they learned. Since childhood, the message was clear. You work, you deserve to rest, you deserve something good. And that something good always had a price. So the cycle begins, and it never stops on its own. Because it's not a financial habit, it's an emotional identity. It's how the person relates to relief, to merit, to the feeling of finally being able to breathe. And as long as that relationship doesn't change, no spreadsheet will change the outcome. The Stoics had a concept that most people read and don't truly understand. They called it apatheia. It's not apathy in the sense we use today, indifference, disinterest, lack of emotion. It's something much more sophisticated. It's the ability not to be governed by your own emotional reactions. To feel the impulse and not obey automatically. To have money in hand and not need to turn it into immediate relief. That's not coldness, it's control. And it is exactly what separates those who accumulate from those who never accumulate, regardless of how much they earn. Because the issue was never the size of the paycheck. It was what happens inside the mind, the moment the money appears. There is a simple mental experiment. Think of two people who earn the same salary. They work in the same sector. They are the same age, have the same education level, similar living conditions. 10 years later, one has assets, the other has debts. What happened? The answer most people give is wrong. One was more disciplined, one worked harder, one was luckier. No, the difference lies in something much deeper than superficial discipline. It lies in how each of those people feels money. One grew up learning, consciously or not, that money is future security, that saving is a form of care, that giving something up now means gaining something greater later. The other grew up learning that money is present relief, that spending is deserving, that the future is too abstract to justify sacrifice in the present. Neither of them made a conscious decision about this. It was installed. Like an emotional operating system running in the background, invisible, controlling every financial decision without the person realizing it. And the most disturbing part, you can know intellectually that you need to save money. You can understand the logic of compound interest. You can have read the right books. And still not be able to change your behavior. Because the problem is not in knowledge, it's in the emotional system operating beneath the knowledge. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in the Meditations that seems simple, but destroys a lot when you truly understand it. You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Most read this as motivation. It's not. It's a brutal observation about where real control begins. Because external events, salary, market, economy, opportunities, are outside your control. What is within your control is how you react when money appears. And that reaction is learned, which means it can be unlearned, but that requires something far beyond willpower. It requires the person to look inside and ask a question few have the courage to ask. Why do I spend when I spend? Not what I spend, not how much I spend. Why? What emotion precedes the spending? What feeling does the spending resolve? What does money represent emotionally before it represents anything rationally? These questions are uncomfortable because the answers reveal something the person would rather not see. That many expenses are not about the product. They are about the emotional state the product promises to deliver. Relief, control, pleasure, status, identity. There is a specific psychological dynamic that appears in people who grew up in environments of real scarcity. Not necessarily extreme poverty, but environments where money was tense, where there were conversations about lack, where the month sometimes didn't stretch far enough, where money never seemed sufficient. In those environments, the mind learns one very specific thing. Money will run out, not as a conscious belief, as a deep sensation. And if money is going to run out anyway, spending now makes perfect emotional sense. Why save something that will disappear? Why delay pleasure for a security that life experience taught does not exist? This is not irrationality. It is a completely logical psychological adaptation to the environment where the person grew up. The problem is that this adaptation keeps operating even when the environment changes, even when the salary grows, even when real scarcity no longer exists. The mind still acts as if money were temporary, as if saving were naive, as if the present were the only reliable time. And that is where decades of work disappear silently. There is a behavior pattern that consistently appears in people who never accumulate wealth. It's not the pattern most people imagine. It's not laziness. It's not lack of ambition. It's not lack of effort. It's the opposite. It's constant work, real effort, genuine responsibility. But along with that, there is a financial movement that repeats every time something improves. The standard of living rises alongside. You earn more, you spend more, you get a promotion, you change cars, your income increases, bigger house, life improves, expenses grow proportionally. This has a technical name, lifestyle inflation. But psychologically, it is something much deeper than a bad financial habit. It's an unconscious belief that improving your life means spending more. That progress is visible, that success has a look, that achieving something means showing that you achieved it. And as long as this belief operates, every increase in income will automatically turn into an increase in expenses. And the number at the end of the month will remain similar. Because the pattern is not about how much comes in, it's about how much the person's identity demands goes out. Epictetus had an origin that most people forget when they read his texts. He was a slave, not metaphorically, literally, and even within one of the most extreme conditions of deprivation of liberty that exist. He developed a philosophy that is still studied today by leaders, strategists, and people who understand real power. The core of what he taught was simple and devastating. Freedom does not begin when you have more. It begins when you need less. This is not religious frugality. It's not naive asceticism. It's not contempt for comfort. It is a precise observation about where real control resides. Because as long as your emotional well-being depends on a certain level of consumption, you are never truly free. You are always working to maintain the standard, always vulnerable to any income interruption, always 1 month away from emotional collapse. And the cruel irony is that many of these people feel rich. They have a good car, an organized house, the right clothes, an appearance of stability. But inside there is constant tension, a silent pressure that never fully disappears. Because when your lifestyle costs everything that comes in, there is no margin for error, no room for opportunity, no real security. There is only the performance of security, and performing is exhausting. Something happens to people who finally understand this. It's not a dramatic decision. It's not a radical turnaround. It's not a spectacular transformation they post on social media. It's silent. It's a shift in perception that happens internally and reorganizes everything afterward. The person stops seeing saved money as deprivation and starts seeing it as power. They stop feeling that saving is losing and start feeling that saving is gaining, not the product, but something far more valuable. Option. Because accumulated money is not idle money. It's the ability to say no. It's the ability to wait for the right opportunity. It's the ability to leave bad situations without desperation. It's the ability to make decisions with clarity instead of with fear. And that ability is something no product can deliver. No purchase solves this. No consumption replaces it. It is built slowly, silently. By people no one is watching get rich. There is a conversation most people have never had with themselves. Not about investments, not about financial strategy, not about which product to buy or which app to use. It's a simpler conversation and harder than all of that. It's the conversation about what money represents emotionally. For some people, money is security. For others, it's freedom. For others, it's power. For others, it's love, because they grew up in environments where money was the most visible form of care. For others, it's guilt, because they were taught that wanting to have is wrong, is greed, is something morally suspicious. And that emotional representation, that invisible meaning the person assigned to money long before they understood what a bank account was, governs everything. It governs how they earn. It governs how they save. It governs how they spend. It governs how they feel when they have it and when they don't. And most importantly, it governs the invisible ceiling they set for themselves, because there is a real psychological phenomenon in people who grew up without money or with scarce money. When they begin to accumulate beyond a certain point, something inside resists. It's not conscious sabotage. It's the emotional system signaling that this territory is unknown, that this level of accumulation does not match the constructed identity. That having much more than those who came before creates a kind of internal dissonance. And then, without realizing it, the person finds ways to spend the excess. A renovation here, a trip there, a generous gift, an impulsive business deal, a financial decision that seemed to make sense, but deep down resolved an emotional equation. And the balance returns to the level that feels psychologically correct. The familiar level, the safe level, the level that creates no dissonance. This is not weakness of character. Let this be clear. It's not laziness, it's not lack of intelligence, it's not lack of effort or ambition. It is a protection mechanism the mind developed to maintain internal coherence, to keep the person within the limits they learned to consider normal. And the problem is that those limits were defined by other people, by parents who also had their limits defined by other people, by environments that were never built to produce accumulation, by experiences that taught that a certain level of scarcity is natural, inevitable, even honest. And as long as those limits are not consciously identified and confronted, they will operate invisibly, determining outcomes that the person will attribute to external circumstances, to the economy, to lack of opportunity, to bad luck, when in reality the limit was inside. The Stoics had a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. It was simple. The person would sit and imagine in detail what would happen if they lost everything. Not to fall into anxiety, for the opposite. To realize that the fear of collapse, the invisible threat governing so many bad financial decisions, is smaller than it seems when faced directly. To discover that the person would survive, that they would find a way, that the worst-case scenario, although difficult, would not be the end. And when that fear loses power, decisions change completely. The person stops spending to relieve anxiety, stops consuming to create a sense of control, stops showing off to reduce the fear of irrelevance, and begins making financial decisions with clarity instead of emotion. That is the moment accumulation truly begins. Not when income increases, when fear decreases. There is a type of person few recognize at first glance. They don't wear an expensive watch. They don't drive an attention-grabbing car. They don't talk about what they have. They don't engage in conversations about investments in social situations. They don't feel the need for others to know anything. But there is something in the way they move that is different. A calm that is not passivity. A tranquility that is not indifference. a lightness that clearly does not come from an absence of ambition. It comes from an absence of fear. That person built something most people never build. Not necessarily a huge fortune, but margin, financial margin that translates into emotional margin. The ability to say no without desperation. The ability to wait without anxiety. The ability to observe opportunities with clarity, because there is no internal short-term pressure distorting the view. That person understood something that destroys the entire cycle. Freedom is not having a lot, it's needing little to feel safe. And that changes the equation completely. Because when your emotional security threshold is low, any accumulation becomes real power. Each month saved is a month of freedom purchased. Each expense eliminated is one less chain. Each false need discarded is more control over your own time. There is a modern illusion that few question. The illusion that more income solves the financial problem. If I earn more, I'll be able to save. If I get a raise, I'll start investing. If the business grows, then I'll have a surplus. But what the data shows, what real human observation shows, is that higher income without psychological change only produces a larger version of the same pattern. More inflow, more outflow, same emotional outcome. Because the problem was never the income. It was the relationship with money. And that relationship is not solved with more money. It is solved with a shift in perception that precedes any financial decision. The perception that accumulating is not deprivation. It is the slow construction of something that buys the only resource no product can return. Free time, real choice, financial peace that does not depend on everything continuing to function perfectly. Seneca wrote something that seems simple but carries enormous weight. It is not the man who has little who is poor, it is the man who desires more. This is not resignation. It is the most precise observation that exists about the cycle that keeps hardworking people financially trapped for decades. Because the desire for more, when not connected to real construction, is a bottomless pit. You buy the car, and you're already thinking about the next one. You get the apartment, and you're already dissatisfied with the size. You reach the salary you wanted, and you already feel it's not enough. Not because you are greedy, but because desire was trained to function that way. To always point to the next level of consumption as a solution to current discomfort. And as long as this operates, no financial achievement will produce peace. It will produce the next consumption goal, and the cycle continues. The transition that few make and that changes everything when it happens is not financial. It's identity-based. It's the moment when the person stops defining themselves by what they consume and starts defining themselves by what they build. They stop using their standard of living as a symbol of who they are, and start using autonomy and control as the real definition of success. This is an enormous psychological leap, because for years, perhaps decades, the person used consumption as their identity language. This outfit says who I am. This car speaks to my level. This trip shows I've made it somewhere. This restaurant communicates status. None of this is frivolous in itself. But when identity depends on these things to exist, the person never stops spending to exist. Because existing, feeling like someone of value, has a monthly cost. And that cost rises as the social environment rises. Because the reference group changes. And with it changes what you need to have in order not to feel inferior. Something happens when you spend time near people who accumulated wealth silently. Not those who inherited it. Not those who had an extraordinary stroke of luck. Those who built it, slowly, over years, without an audience. You notice they have something in common that is not obvious at first glance. It's not exceptional intelligence. It's not superhuman discipline. It's not an absence of pleasure or life. It's a different relationship with approval. They simply don't need others to know. They feel no discomfort driving a simple car when they could have something flashier. They feel no pressure to maintain an appearance of wealth proportional to what they have. They don't engage in conversations about assets or investments to impress anyone. And this absence of need for financial validation is exactly what allows them to keep accumulating while others spend to look like they have accumulated. It's an invisible psychological advantage, but it's the most powerful of all. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the known world. Emperor, commander, leader of an empire. And he wrote daily to himself about the temptation of the ego, about how external status corrodes the internal, about how others' approval is a drug that simultaneously addicts and weakens. A man who had everything status can offer, writing reminders to himself that status is an illusion. That says something very specific about human nature, that the impulse to seek validation does not disappear with achievement, that it needs to be managed consciously, that it is a constant internal battle, not a definitive victory. And for those who are still building, still accumulating, still in the process, the challenge is even greater, because the achievement hasn't yet arrived to test the ego, but the ego is already operating. It's already demanding. It's already consuming resources that should be saved. There is a specific moment in many people's lives where everything could have changed. It wasn't a big missed opportunity. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was a period, sometimes long, where income was good, expenses were manageable, and there was a real possibility to start accumulating significantly. And in that period, instead of accumulating, the person expanded their lifestyle, sometimes consciously, as a reward for having made it, sometimes unconsciously, as an automatic response to having more available. And the period passed. The window closed. Not dramatically, no one wakes up and realizes the window closed. They realize it years later, looking back, calculating what could have been different. This is not about blame. It's not a judgment. It's simply what happens when financial behavior operates on emotional autopilot. Without intention, without direction, without awareness of what is being built or destroyed in each small decision. The good news, and there is good news, is that the pattern can be interrupted. Not with extreme discipline that the person won't be able to maintain, not with radical deprivation that will create resentment and collapse, not with a spreadsheet that will be abandoned in 3 weeks. With a shift in perception, with the decision to understand, before anything else, what emotion governs financial decisions. What is the trigger that precedes unnecessary spending? What is the real need that consumption is trying to solve? What is the fear that saved money could relieve if the person allowed it to stay saved? These questions have no quick answers, but they are the only questions that truly matter. Because when the person understands the emotional why behind financial behavior, the how to change becomes much more accessible. There is a phrase that appears frequently in conversations about money that reveals everything about the mindset that keeps people trapped. Life is short, used to justify spending that shouldn't happen, to rationalize impulsive consumption, to silence the inner voice that says maybe this isn't the right time. And in the abstract, the phrase is true. Life is short, the present has value, pleasure has value. But there is a version of life is short that is wisdom, and there is a version that is emotional surrender disguised as philosophy. The wisdom version says, choose your pleasures well. Spend where there is real value. Don't postpone all satisfaction in the name of a hypothetical future. The surrender version says, don't think about the future. Spend now. Tomorrow is an excuse for those afraid to live. The difference between the two is not obvious at the moment of decision, but it is devastatingly obvious 10 years later. There is something the Stoic philosophers practiced that has direct financial application. They called it ascesis, voluntary discipline, intentional practice of discomfort. Not as punishment, as training. The idea was simple. If you voluntarily practice the absence of certain things, you discover you need less than you imagined to be functional, stable, even happy. And when you discover you need less, the fear of losing diminishes. And when the fear of losing diminishes, decision-making power increases. This has a direct financial application, which has nothing to do with voluntary poverty or contempt for comfort. It is about consciously questioning which needs are real and which were built by exposure, social comparison, or marketing. Which expenses exist because they add real value to life, and which exist because the person never stopped to question whether they should exist. This exercise, simple, uncomfortable, transformative, is where many people find significant amounts of money each month that were being directed toward nothing meaningful. Not due to lack of money, due to lack of attention. Most people know they should save more. That is not the problem. The problem is the distance between knowing and doing. And that distance, the gap between financial knowledge and financial behavior, has a very specific cause that the personal finance industry rarely addresses. Emotion, not lack of information, not lack of discipline in the abstract sense. Concrete and specific emotion operating in real time at the moment of decision. The anxiety that spending relieves. The immediate pleasure that consumption delivers, the sense of control that the purchase temporarily creates, the status that the product instantly communicates, the emotional relief that comes from finally having something that was desired. These are real, immediate, powerful, concrete emotional reinforcements. And on the other side, what is there? An abstract number that will grow slowly in some account the person rarely opens. The battle is unequal, not because the person is weak, but because the human brain was not built to value an abstract future over concrete immediate pleasure. This requires practice, intentionality, systems that remove the decision from the emotional moment. And above all, it requires understanding that the process exists, that it's not a character flaw, but biology that can be managed. We have reached a point that few reach in this conversation. Not about techniques, not about financial products, not about investment strategies, about identity. Because in the end, the deepest financial question any person needs to answer is not where to invest or how much to save. It is, who did I decide to be in relation to money? Because identity governs behavior in a way that rules and goals never can. A person who identifies as someone who accumulates will find ways to accumulate even when circumstances are difficult. A person who identifies as someone who never has money will find ways to confirm that identity even when circumstances improve. This is not determinism. It's not fatalism. It's simply how identity works. And the practical question is, identities can be rewritten. Not overnight, not with empty affirmations repeated in front of a mirror, but through small, consistent decisions that accumulate evidence of a new way of being. Each time the person saves instead of spending when the impulse arises, they are creating evidence that they are the kind of person who saves. Each time they question an expense, instead of acting automatically, they are creating evidence that they are the kind of person who has financial awareness. Each time they resist the impulse to consume to impress, they are creating evidence that external approval does not govern their decisions. Those evidences accumulate, and with them, identity transforms. There is something beautiful, if it is possible to use that word when talking about financial psychology, in the process of a person who stops working to survive and starts building to liberate. It's not dramatic. There is no exact day. It's a change of direction that happens silently, sometimes without the person clearly realizing when it began. But one day they look at the numbers and realize they have margin, that they have a choice, that they could say no to a bad professional situation without desperation, that they could make a choice based on value instead of need, that the fear that once governed certain decisions is simply no longer there with the same intensity. And that feeling, that specific tranquility that comes from real construction, is priceless. It cannot be bought. It cannot be paid in installments. It cannot be shown off. It's completely invisible from the outside and completely transformative on the inside. Let us return to the beginning, to the man who worked for decades and got near the end with less than his effort deserved. The question is not why he worked so hard. The question is what no one taught him about the difference between working and building, about the difference between trading time for money and intentional accumulation of capital, about the difference between spending to feel like you've made it somewhere and saving to have real choice about where to go. This conversation does not happen in schools. It rarely happens in families. It almost never happens in work environments. And when it doesn't happen, the pattern repeats. Generation after generation, job after job, paycheck after paycheck, with real effort producing minimal results. Not because people are weak, but because no one showed them that the problem is psychological before it is financial. The Stoics built an entire philosophy around one central idea, that the only real domain you have is over your mind. Your reactions, your impulses, your choices in the face of what you feel. And when you apply this to money, when you begin to observe your own mind in real time at the moment of financial decisions, something changes. Not immediately, not dramatically, but consistently and irreversibly. Because you stop acting on emotional impulse and start acting with intention. You stop spending to relieve what you feel and start saving to build what you want. You stop using consumption as identity and start using autonomy as identity. And little by little, silently, without anyone around you noticing, you become the kind of person who builds. Not the one who works to survive, the one who works to liberate. And that distinction, too small to be visible from the outside, too large to be ignored from within, is where everything begins. Or begins again. It's not too late. It's never about the past. It's about the next decision. You made it this far. That already says something about you. But before closing this video, I want to leave you with a question. Not about investing, not about strategy. An honest question about yourself. If you stop and think about the last 6 months, about the expenses that happened, the financial decisions you made, the money that came in and what stayed, what emotion was governing most of those decisions? Fear, immediate pleasure, need for approval, reward for effort, relief from anxiety? Write it in the comments. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be elaborate. One word is enough. Because the answer you give will reveal more about your financial situation than any spreadsheet ever will. And maybe that is the conversation you needed to have with yourself.